Let's start with a part 2 of playing and thinking like a grandmaster, and let's see more of different positional ideas, tactical approach to the game, and ways of accomplishing and planning on a successful middle game. The game I want to show you is with it's a couple of next couple of games of very famous grandmaster Gata Kamsky, whom I worked with for extended period of time, and he has some very well planned and very nicely executed tactically and strategically games. C4. This is the game, his game against Argentinian Grandmaster Pablo Zarnicki. C4, E6, Knight C3, Bishop B4, E4, C5, F4. Now this is a little unorthodox approach to the opening, but again, we don't want to pay real attention to the opening that much. D6, Knight F3, Knight F6, and here White played a little bit unusual looking move, Bishop D3. After Bishop to D3, Black castled, White castled, Black went Knight C6, and here is the White's plan. They want to develop dark square bishop to B2. So they played B3 with the idea to play Bishop B2. Now, the decision made by Black is questionable, but it's hard to tell what's the best move here. Bishop takes C3, pawn takes C3, and Knight E8. Let's talk about this position. After Knight E8, it's clear that Black wants to play F5 to block light square bishop and dark square bishop. That's the plan. Now, if Black plays F5, White takes and Black takes, you can see that Black's bishops don't have much of a future here, White's bishops. And Black is very close to achieving equality. Maybe position is equal. However, in this position, after Knight E8, White has some space advantage, and they have, if you see the bishops on D3 and C3 and C1, kind of aiming on the queen, on the king side. Well, the possible moves were E5 or D5 to stop Black from playing F5. But if E5, I don't know, maybe Black can play F5 anyway, because when D takes C, F takes C, actually this was another good way to play for White. E5 is a very sensible move. The other possible move is F5. That's what was chosen by White. Both of those moves are equally, I think, equally good, and it's very difficult to give preference to E5 or F5. One thing is clear: you can't let Black play F5 and kill your bishops. Move was played by White is F5, and now White has two bishops. If Black plays E5, then White's D3 bishop is bad. D3 bishop is real bad. But what about this position? White's D3 bishop is bad, but Black's all minor pieces, every minor piece is very bad. Knight on C6 has no future, Knight on E8 has no future, and so is bishop on C8. Meanwhile, White can prepare king side advancing, like bishop e3, queen d2, and then g4, g5, and it's kind of one-sided game. This would have been very, very bad for black. So white played f5, and black hardly has any counterplay after that. So what happened after f5? E takes f, e takes f, and now you see that dark square bishop is good. So black played knight e5, and white simply preserved the bishop by playing bishop c2. Black is very cramped, and they have really difficult game. So after bishop c2, black has to somehow to find some. So bishop e4 instead of bishop c2 wasn't that good of an idea, because if bishop comes to d5, knight can go to f6 and hit the bishop. For instance, on bishop e4, h6 may be the move, followed by knight f6. Why h6? Because black does not want to allow, after knight f6, bishop g5, pinning the knight on f6. So white played bishop c2, and black, in my opinion, made a terrible move, f6. And after this, I think game unfolds practically without any problems for white. Now white played bishop e4, and this is very strong move, because since bishop goes to d5, and black's knight on e8 cannot access f6 square. So after bishop e4, the practically game is over, because every one of white's minor pieces is going to be all over the black's king position. And after bishop e4, there was knight c7, knight takes e5, and f takes e. Well, in my opinion, d takes c maybe was giving black little more chances to survive. Even then, after queen f3, black's position is very grim, because white can go g4, g5, and after fe, but after fe, practically everything is over. Queen h5, you see that now is threatening f6, and when queen, with the support of two bishops and rook, they're gonna open and start assaulting black's king, there is not much gonna be for black to do. After queen h5, queen e8, white simply went queen h4. Now f6 is coming, and it cannot be stopped. Meanwhile, black's minor pieces are totally passive. And a game happened, queen f7, bishop g5. You see the f6 is all prepared, and next move is going to be f6. Except black played d5, c takes d, and knight takes d5. And now after f6, the game is practically over. White is threatening queen takes h7 mate. If pawn takes f6, then simply bishop takes f6, and knight takes f6, rook takes f6. This is very simple combination and very elementary. Rook is untouchable because of mate on h7, and after queen g7, simple bishop takes h7, or even queen takes h7. Probably bishop takes h7. Black is absolutely busted. So in this position, black makes desperate attempt to keep position closed after f6, g6. But now, after f6, g6, simply bishop takes d5, queen takes d5. You see black's bishop on c8 and rook on a8. They are totally defenseless. They're totally unable to help black's king position. f7 check. rook takes f7, and rook f to d1 check. Dark squares are killers here. Rook f d1, queen c6, rook d8 check, and after rook f8, the final blow, this is the only move, obviously on king g7 there is a mating, won by queen h6 or bishop h6, and after rook f8, bishop h6, black simply resigned. Rook is hanging on f8. If rook takes d8, that will be queen takes d8 and rook f1 check, or on a rook e8 there is a simple queen e7 move, attacking black's rook on e8 and threatening queen g7 mate. Game is over. This was hardly there was any tactics. There was a one, if you can tell, there was a one tactical move. f6 was played in the position like this, in this position. After white played f6, you can see that gf, bishop takes f6, is totally hopeless for black, and nothing else that white did in this game was any hard to plan, and any really complicated positional idea. White was simply opening the bishops and aiming and planning attack on king's side. It was very effective, very successful, and very deadly at the same time. Okay, let's look at another game of Geda Kamsky. I know he's thinking he has certain, I worked with him and I know he has certain rules in the game that he follows, but he follows them religiously, and he has certain understanding and very well focused on the plan that he chooses. He understands the position well, he makes the plan and goes straight forward. He very focused on his plans. This another game is a good example of it. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, bishop b4 check, knight d2, castle, g3, d5, bishop g2, knight e4, castle, knight takes d2, bishop takes d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and knight d7. Now, this is not really a good way to play the opening for black, because pawn structure is okay for black, but light square bishop on c8 is real bad, and there is no way to conduct any kind of counterplay in near future. Queen c3, c6, rook f1. White has space advantage if they play e4, and that's what they do next move. Rook e8, rook 8 to d1, and on b6 right now they want e4, bishop b7, and now what white has is space advantage. Let's talk about this space advantage. How should we play this position? There are more than one ways to play this position. There are few plans that are okay. One of them is e5. e5 gives white a clear advantage because white is better placed in the center. It's not easy for black to play c5 at any point. So then they have space advantage. Maybe they will try h4, knight g5, some kind of attack on king's side, and they have some advantage. This is one way. The other way is to try to open position while white's pieces stand better, which I think is the more effective plan. Knight e5 was played, which this is the move I like very much, because on knight takes e5, if it was played, knight takes e5, Then after DE, there's a big pressure on black's D pawn and on D file. So black didn't like it, and black went in this position, knight F6. But after knight F6, E takes D, E takes D. Well, notice that if C takes D, it's going to be kind of a pin on B7 bishop. It's not very pleasant either. Maybe white can simply go C5, or maybe B4 followed by C5. B4 is a strong move here. Black cannot take on C4 because bishop on B7 is unpre, and next move is going to be C5, giving white a protected pass pawn on C5. So black retakes with E pawn, and now white goes B4. Now let's assess this position. How can you assess it? There are no two ways to assess this position. White has very strong knight on E5. They have much better bishop on G2 than black's bishop, and they have space, and they have practically control in the center and pressure in the center. Black's position is real difficult. After B4, black is searching for counterplay, A5. White went A4. Black took on B4, and queen takes B4. And now rook A5. Now let's look for the ways for white to put more pressure. Position is already has a lot of tactical potentials. White's pieces are very active. When your pieces are very active and you have some space edge, you can be sure that there are some tactical possibilities. There may not be immediate tactic, but there are some tactical possibilities that you have to develop. So rook A5, white went rook B1, black went bishop A8. Of course, white doesn't want to simplify position by playing queen takes B6, queen takes B6, rook takes B6, rook takes A4. That will let black out. That will let black out of it. So white wants to maintain the pressure on black's position. After bishop A8, C takes D, knight takes D5, and simply queen B3. Now black's rook has to stand and guard the knight. C6 pawn is weak, and B6 pawn is weak. They are both weak pawns. Knight on A5 is very strong, and I would say black's position is already lost. Rook A7, knight to C4. Now white has another threat. White has a threat of exchanging rooks on E8 and taking the pawn on B6 possibly. So black is playing rook takes E1, rook takes E1, and now G6. White plays H4 just to open the look for position, and also possibly trying H5 and H6. So what is white doing now? There is still no tactical shot yet. They are improving their position. H4, trying for H5. Black played H5. Now rook E5, continue pressure. So possible continuations, maybe bishop takes D5, C takes D, and knight B6. That wins a pawn. That's a threat. That's a threat that cannot be undermined. So black plays rook A6. But now white makes move that forces immediate resignation for black. The move that white made in this position is simply bishop takes D5. That's what I said. Remember I said there has to be some tactical solutions because too many targets. There is a king position is bad, back rank problems. So after bishop takes d5, black resigned. Because if c takes d5, you see there is a double attack that is immediately ends the game, that attacking black rook on a6 and threatening rook e8 check, winning the queen. Black can defend one or the other, but not both. So black is losing heavy material here, and so black has resigned after bishop takes d5. This is well-planned pressure in the center, and that was based on better minor piece, better placed minor piece, and looking actively for final tactical shot, which eventually paid off, and in the final position in a form of a queen b5 move. This was also interestingly played. Now, one game I want to show you. This is extremely dynamic and double-edged game. It played also by me. Well, I remember it was very, very stressful game because it was played against one of the legends of chess, David Bronstein. A game was played in 1973 when he was still up there, you can say. And I was playing black, and it's Sicilian. I'm going to show you why this game is interesting, because black, when I played black, I had a certain plan for piece activity. It wasn't 100% smooth, but it was very, very consistent. There was a lot of tactics involved, but none of the tactics, if you notice, that was played in this game, that was used in this game, none of these tactics was any difficult that any of you cannot do. It's very simple tactics. But it was used heavily because position was too sharp. Knight c6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6, bishop g5. This is a rouser variation of Sicilian. Queen d2, a6, castles long, bishop d7, f4, bishop e7, knight f3, b5. Bishop takes f6, pawn takes f6. This is very well-known position. It's a very old position in the chess. G3, b4, knight e2, queen b6, king b1, castles long, knight c1, king b8, f5. This is very typical position for this rouser system in Sicilian. Now, what is white trying to do here? White is trying to put a lot of pressure on black's e6 pawn. For example, after f5, it's black's move. Let me see what the white's plan is. To take on e6, possibly play bishop h3, maybe knight d3, knight f4. When they put a lot of pressure on e5, and black has to push the e-pawn, that gives white weak squares on d5 and weak light squares, and maybe on f5 too, and then position may become very dangerous for black. So after f5, what I chose, I took on f5. Now this gives, after we took on f5, pawn takes and bishop takes f5. You see, in this position, black has an extra pawn, but it's absolutely irrelevant extra pawn, because if you see black's pawn, they are comically weak. h7, double isolated pawn on f, h pawn, d pawn, weak pawn on b4, and a6 is a target. But the reason why it was done, I did not win this pawn for the sake of the pawn, But I got my bishop active on f5 and the square for the knight on e5. So after bishop takes f5, queen f4, bishop e6, knight h4. I'm playing here player who was one of well, he is a genius of the player, and he has very good sense of exploring weak squares. Knight goes to f5, bishop goes to g2, and white's pieces may become dangerously active. After knight h4, knight e5. So I have to be very active myself in this position. Knight f5, bishop takes f5, because this knight on f5 is totally unbearable. Queen takes f5, and here I went d5. I want to open my bishop on e7. I cannot play with a bishop that looks like a pawn. So d5, bishop g2, rook d7. And in this position, white continue putting pressure by playing rook e1. I think the best continuation was just simply to take on d5 with the rook. And after that, if I take rook takes d5, bishop takes d5, I have an active position. I have very nice knight on e5. I have open d-file. My bishop is good. I think it's a reasonable position to have. However, my opponent here chose rook h to e1. Rook h to d8. As you can tell, here is the tactical threat, rook takes e5. And if pawn takes, queen takes with a check, and the h8 rook is loose. But rook d8 was part of the plan anyway. And here, white played queen h7. You see, but this is irrelevant pawn, unimportant pawn. So we know now I have strong knight on e5, active piece position, and what I have to do with the black here to start organizing attack on a queen side. And that's the beginning. a5, knight d3, which I have to take now. Knight takes d3, queen takes d3, and a4. Now, position is very sharp now, because, as you can tell, when there are opposite color bishops, attack may become very, very dangerous. a4, h4, a3. Now, black must be consistent. Black cannot think about this white's pass pawn on h-file and try to... Black has a plan to organize weaknesses and try to organize strong attack on a queen side. And a3 move is forced. That's the way. If white pushes b3, white has a lot of weaknesses on dark square. So after a3, white went h5. I don't think this is a good move, because my next move proves it. I went f5. Now this is a very strong move. First of all, it stops h6, but it's not so much h6 it stops as threatens queen f6, or maybe bishop f6, putting a lot of pressure on b2 pawn. So I knew that I had to do something real quick. And after f5, white is facing some problems. Queen b3 was played. Now queen f6 is not good, because now white has a threat of b takes a. And after which, black is in a lot of trouble. So a takes b, rook e3, and rook a7. Now, rook a7 contains very strong threat. I think it's a threat. Well, rook a3 is one possibility, but after rook a3, you can see that white loses rook, because queen takes a3 doesn't work, because black simply takes the queen, and on rook b3 they have bishop b4. So rook a3 is a real threat. And here, my opponent played a4. And you can see that I cannot take this pawn en passant because black's queen is on pre. So after a4, bishop went to f6, protecting b2 pawn. It's a very important pawn for black to keep, because that creates a lot of threats around white's king. After a4, bishop f6, rook e2 d3. Now white wants to organize counterplay by rook takes d5. But here comes queen b5 move. You see, now black is threatening rook takes a4 with instant kill. And rook takes d5 is not good. That's the calculation you have to go. And you can see what created such a sharp position. Just consistent play of creating threats. There is no single tactical shot yet. So queen b5, you cannot call it a tactical shot because white cannot take the queen because of checkmate in one move. That's not really a tactical shot that you cannot see. Queen b5 is a good move, threatening rook takes a4. Rook takes d5 is not good for white because rook takes d5, and now white has to retake with the rook or with the queen. It does not really matter, because if rook takes d5, then queen takes a4, and white is in a lot of trouble. And same thing happens on queen takes d5. If queen takes d5, we simply exchange. This is probably the best way to play, was to play for white. But after bishop takes d5, rook takes a4, and now bishop a2, which still, I think, not such a good position for white, because h pawn is stopped, bishop comes on c3, and bishop has to stay on a2 to stop the mate on a1. It's still better for white, but I think that was for black, but it still was the best way to play for white. Now let's see what happened in this game. And after rook e2 d3, well, here black played queen b5 and white played c3. Now this is a dubious move. Dubious move because after rook takes a4, that's what happened in the game, and queen takes b2 is the only move that white has here. Now let's shuffle the possibilities here. Let's look at rook takes d5. On rook takes d5, we simply take on d5, and white must play rook takes d5 again. And you see, if we go now simply queen to b6 maybe, or queen to a6, white does not even have a simple check. And rook a1 threat followed by bishop takes c3 is devastating. So for this reason, next move is practically forced, queen takes b2. Now the position is very tactical. You see that both kings are in jeopardy. If white breaks through on d file, black may be in a lot of trouble. And meanwhile, white is under attack also on b file. So next move is very powerful, rook a3. Now I couldn't play bishop takes c3 because rook takes c3, and you see that it's pinned. It's all one move tactics. But rook a3 completely changes the picture. Now after rook a3, white cannot play queen takes b4 because rook to b3 check, winning the queen, and at the same time threatening bishop takes c3. So rook takes d5 is forced, rook takes d5, rook takes d5, and queen b6. Black's position is totally hopeless here. White's position, sorry. White's position is totally hopeless here. What the threat is bishop takes c3. The threat is queen g1 check. and queen takes b4 loses to rook b3 check. Here, my opponent found the big threat is bishop takes c3, of course. Found clever defense, bishop f1, and defense is based on bishop takes c3 move. Now, if I played bishop c3, this is a draw because white plays simply queen takes a3, sacrificing the queen, and after black takes back, then rook b5, getting the queen back. It's simple two-move combination, temporary sacrifice of the queen, and we getting opposite color bishops, an easy draw for white. So in this position, now I did feel, and I was right, that black's position is totally winning, and I went queen c7, king c7, getting out of this pin. And after king c7, now I reinstated bishop takes c3 threat. It's very simple, calculated now. And after white played rook b5, then I went queen e3. And now same threat, bishop takes c3. Now queen e2. And again, queen takes c3 I don't want now because of queen c4, exchanging queens, and black has some drawing chances. But after rook a1 check, it's all over. This is a rook sacrifice, very effective. It's a cute sacrifice, but it's very simple. King takes, queen takes c3 check. There's only one move, king b1. Or king e2 turns out to be exact same thing because queen a3 and still has to go king b1. And after queen b3 check, white is totally lost because on king c1, bishop g5 completely ends the game. Bishop g5, and you see white has to interpose the queen, and then game is over. So this is, again, tactics, but very, very simple and very, focused plan, well-focused plan, and well-focused play by black. Now, maybe white had somewhere in the game better position. That's very possible, but that's what the game is about. You play, and no matter what your plan is, be very consistent, and don't miss two-move combinations, very simple combinations. You have to learn tactics, have a knowledge of various tactical motifs, themes, and then be very consistent with the plan you build. And that's what the secret of the successful results in a tournament. So, and also there's the positional aspect. You have to have positional knowledge. If you don't have positional knowledge, you can never pick the right plan. So it's all connected. Now the game I want to show you is a good example of a quick opening disaster when one side does not really play, follow the basic rules of quick development. And this is Korchnoy's game. I remember Korchnoy being especially proud of it. e4, d5, cd, cd. It's against one Chinese grandmaster. Knight f6, bishop check. Knight d7, knight c3. a6, bishop e2. Knight b6, knight f3. Knight takes d5. Castles, e6, d4. And here I think the best move is simply going bishop e7, developing and then going b5, developing and going b5 and bishop b7. Bishop b4 move. I don't really like this move. Bishop does not belong on b4, it belongs on e7. Queen b3, castles, bishop g5. Now you see that black is starting having problems. it wasn't too late to go bishop e7. But black continues with the wrong plan. Rook fc1. And now black has to solve some problems. They want h6 and bishop d2. Now black cannot develop normally. Well, they won bishop d7 and they lost quickly. But what else to do? Now, if they move back, they're going to lose a piece. Queen d5, knight takes queen d8, knight takes d5. Bishop d7 they played, and they lost also real quick. So, if you cannot solve the problem by natural means, that means you're already in a lot of trouble. Bishop d7 happened. Now the simple tactical shot. Again, most tactical shots are very, very simple. If we are talking about complicated combinations that need a lot of calculations, I purposely avoided this kind of examples because we don't want to start, writing novels before we learn the alphabet. So knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. It's a simple combination. And you see the bishop is pinned. And after rook c5, it's simply, black simply loses a piece. If they go b5, the queen is attacked. Bishop cannot take the rook because bishop takes queen. And if pawn goes to d5, simply rook takes d5 wins a piece, because on pawn takes, bishop takes b4, and on bishop takes d2, rook takes d7. White simply wins a piece. And in this position, it's a very simple combination that gives the white winning material advantage. Now, where did black go wrong? We're going to continue with this game and see what they played. Some unnatural moves. Of course, no one could predict this outcome, but that's why you have to have certain rules installed in your brain. When you follow these rules, you will avoid disasters like this. After rook c5, what happened is, after rook c5, bishop takes d2, rook takes a5, bishop takes a5, and knight e5, bishop c8, and white played bishop f3. And on rook d8, white goes rook c1. Black lost a queen for rook and a bishop and still cannot develop. Black played bishop b6. It's a kind of tactical shot. They are trying desperately to, and bishop takes d5, they would play bishop takes d4. No, they cannot just take on d5 because b6 bishop is unpre. So white played simply knight takes f7, king takes f7, bishop takes d5. Now, if black takes the d5 bishop, then white takes the bishop on b6. So bishop takes d4. And now another very, very easy combination. Rook takes c8. This is also a very simple combination. Rook a takes c8. Bishop takes e6, check. King f8. Bishop takes c8. Rook takes c8. And g3. White has decisive material advantage and game is over. So there's nothing to look at. It's very simple tactics that can be, this is kind of punishment for bad play, for unnatural play in the opening. Now let's look at some earlier, some very nice games in earlier career of Anatoly Karpov. That's when he was more dynamic than he is now, and when he played his best chess. This is the game in a Sicilian that played in 1972 in Chess Olympiad in Yugoslavia. He played against a Cuban grandmaster. E4, C5, knight F3, D6, D4, CD, knight takes D4, knight F6, knight C3, A6. This is also the well-known Najdorf variation. F4, E6, bishop E2, queen C7. Castling. Knight C6, king H1, and on bishop D7, A4. This is part of a theory. Bishop E7, knight B3, castle, bishop E3. Very well-known position of Scheveningen. Now, it started with the Najdorf variation and transposed to Scheveningen. Bishop E3, knight B4, A5, bishop C6, bishop B6, and queen B8. Queen D2. And in this position, black had to play knight D7 right away. Instead, they went D5. And after D5, I think they are practically lost. And when you gave the position, this type of position, to player of Karpov's caliber, you know your foot, one foot in the grave at least, maybe both of them. After E5, knight D7, bishop D4. You have bad bishop here, and white is totally opened for kingside assault. It's not gonna last long. Bishop D4, F5 is coming. There is no way of stopping F5. Well, after bishop D4, what happened in the game, black played B5. Black is hoping maybe white will take en passant and they can bring some of their pieces to some activity. White correctly ignored it and went bishop G4. Preparing F5, and there is no way black can stop it. They did attempt it, but they didn't stop it. G6, rook A2, E1, and now rook C8. Now, let's talk about this position just a little. There are certain rules. If you follow the rules and your intuition, you have to play F5 almost without a thinking. This is the piece sacrifice. If pawn takes, bishop takes, you can tell. If pawn retakes here, the king is totally naked on G8. White has rook on F1, rook on E1, bishop on D4, potentially opened, and queen on D2 ready to assault. 4 pieces launching attack on the king's side. There is no way black can survive. And that's what happened in the game. F5, pawn takes, bishop takes F5. Well, black tried knight F8. But pieces are already, the machine is rolling already. So it's not possible to stop this attack. Queen H6. Now, obviously, taking on F5 after E6 is not going to leave black too many chances to survive. So, knight G6, bishop takes G6. On HG, what we have to do, bring one more piece, rook E3 and rook H3. And after bishop F8, queen H4, bishop G7, rook H3. You see, queen comes to H7, and then queen takes G6. There is no defense. Bishop E8, queen H7 check, king F8, queen takes G6. There is nothing to play for. White has everything, black has nothing. Normally, this kind of a proportion of the chances never ends good. So black made another desperate move, hoping for white to take with a pawn and they will take the queen. But after white made a half genius move, rook takes f6, they resigned, or queen takes f6, they resigned. So the position is totally hopeless, and black resigned right here after bishop f6 and rook takes f6. Okay, this is very simple. Now let's look at the next game. It's very similar, same pattern, same ideas, same principles, and nearly the same execution with different opening, different play for black, and different opponent. Oh, this game was played also by Karpov, and again the game was played against another international master and also on the same Olympiad. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, also Najdorf variation, that's how it started, f4, queen c7, bishop d3, e6, castle, bishop e7, knight f3, knight d7. You see, it's pieces, white's pieces stand little differently now. Knight on f3 was on b3 in the other game. Here, black played knight d7 instead of knight c6. So, queen e1, knight c5, e5, knight f2 d7, queen g3, g6, bishop e3, b5. Now white goes bishop d4, creating threat of e takes d, and rook on h8 is loose. Knight takes d3, cd, and d5. You know, this is nearly the same type of position. White has very powerful bishop on d4 that blocks position, same bad bishop on c8, same way of breaking through with f5, same idea of breaking through with f5, and same result, same consequences. So after d5, white can play f5 right now. But before they do that, the way chess player would think, any chess player of reasonable level will concentrate on f5, which is the right thing to do. Because if black takes with e-pawn, then after e6, they are in a lot of trouble. And if they take with a g-pawn, then white's queen penetrates on g7. However, it's useful to put one more piece on a very active position without wasting a tempo, which means rook ac1. I'm putting rook on open file, creating deadly threat of knight takes d5, forcing the queen go to b7, where it totally blocks and kills its own bishop on c8, and now go f5. It's precise way of executing it. After f5, g takes f, queen g7, rook f8, and now knight g5. This is total dark square disaster. Now, black has to give up the dark square bishop, queen takes g5, and then you see that with the exception on rook on f8, every black's piece is on light square. It's like checkers. So that means dark squares are very vulnerable, and game is over, definitely over now. You don't even need to be accurate from now on. Queen b8. Now white went knight e2. I am sure something like knight takes d5 or rook e1 with the idea knight takes d5 and followed by e6 would have done the job. However, Karpov likes the academic approach to these issues. Knight to e2. He wants to go knight f4, knight h5, and bring the knight to the final destination, which mates black on g7. After knight e2, black played bishop b7. Taking on e5 was, of course, very bad for various different reasons. One of them is simply rook takes c8 and bishop takes e5. One of them, I think, is bishop c5, maybe deadlier even, attacking rook on f8 and creating queen e7 threat. So this is not good. And the black played bishop b7. Now knight f4. Queen d8. Queen h5. King e7. Queen takes h7. Now threatening knight g6 check. King e8. Now knight h5. You see the end is near. Knight g7 check is threatening. Knight h5, queen g5. Now black gets hit from all directions. Rook c7, rook b8, and now knight g7 check. And you see that black went king e7. On king d8, you see the knight takes e6 practically mates black. It's a fork on king and queen, and f takes e, queen takes d7 checkmate. This is elementary tactics already. As I said, very simple. It's a two-move combination which you shouldn't have any problem finding. And after knight g7, king e7, bishop c5 check, returning to the same mating position. Knight takes e6, fe, queen takes d7 checkmate. Played very simple. Same f5 breakthrough. Why? Because the pawn structure is the same. The main principles that black's king is vulnerable, same breakthrough, same end, different means, but same end. The picture, general picture, is the same. So very well played in both cases by white. Now, next game I want to show you. It's very interesting. It's also one of the opening disasters when you violate some rules. This rule was violated by the Grandmaster also, by Chinese Grandmaster. It's amazingly, they learn the rules very well. But they learn them so well, actually, that they think that sometimes they can violate them because they know what is it, how. And no one can violate chess rules. d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3, knight d7, bishop d3, bishop d6, castle, castle, e4, d takes e, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. And this is known position, okay? Very well known position. In this position, the best move is considered h6 in modern theory. Well, that was not played too long ago, like game was played like 3-4 years ago. And h6 is the best move. It's known that e5 is not good, because pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and white simply wins a pawn on h7. King takes h7, queen h5, check, followed by queen takes e5. This is known. This is not good for black. However, the better, since this is not good, that's how h6 move became popular, and that's what I played. But black played f5. Now this is clear violation of basic principles. They go f5 and bishop c2, and now they go e5. Now the reason why this is violation is this. Now black opens position after weakening their king side, and after exchanges, the f5 pawn will block their own bishop. So they did some damages to their future development, and then they open position. That does not, on the level that was played, it's a big, big violation, and it's a big, big sin that normally does not go unpunished. Very powerful move in this position is c5, bishop c7. I'm just showing the multiple way of punishing c5, bishop b3 check, and possibly knight g5, creating some deadly threats here. However, way chosen by Korchno is also pretty good. Bishop g5, and black played bishop e7. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and rook e1. Now, what is happening here? White is threatening to take the knight on e5, keeping an extra pawn, and totally winning position. Black must get one pawn back. Rook takes e5, and only pawn they can get is on b2 pawn, because queen takes c4 loses to bishop b3, winning the queen. And after queen takes b2, let's talk about this position. Black has only one active piece, and it's a queen. It's a dead wrong idea. We know this. That's what we learn when we learn the ABC of the game. So queen takes b2. White is he has dominating square on e5 for rook. They have e-file. They have much better bishop, and black's bishop on c8 has very difficult times in this position. Position is totally wrong. c5 was played by white. Very, very strong move. Trying to activate bishop through b3 and bring the rest of the pieces for final assault. Now c5, and after c5, king h8. Now white goes rook e3, threatening rook b3. Very simple move in one move to win a queen. Queen b4. Now queen d3. You see, white has to bring the rook into the game. They cannot go queen d3 because rook is hanging. So they went rook e3, creating the threat. After queen b4, queen d3. Now rook is coming to e1, and black has absolutely no chance here. b6, a3, queen a5, and rook e7. Now, why rook e7? Normally, we would play rook e1. But this is already concrete approach, concrete calculation. You develop pieces. We know that you absolutely have to develop pieces in early stage of the game. But if you can win a piece on move 4 or 5, your opponent made some blunder, you go after that. That's the only reason. There must be very strong reason why you bend why would you bend the rule. And there is a good reason. Rook e7, threatening queen g3, attacking the pawn with a checkmate, and after rook g8, bishop b3. This is a good reason. Now, after rook e7, black played b takes c. Now, queen g3, rook g8, and bishop b3. And after bishop b3, it's obvious threat, bishop takes g8, and on bishop a6, bishop takes g8, rook takes g8, and queen e5. And in this position, black simply resigned because they are down exchange, and on that level it's more than enough. without without any compensation. Pawn is pinned. Next move is pawn takes pawn on any move, including queen c3 also takes pawn. Rook is protected, everything is protected, black has no chance. The result of this attack and very well planned middle game result, white won material. White has strong attack and won material. Attack does not always end with a mate, with a checkmate. If you win material and got to winning ending, that's a successful result of successful attack, and that's what it is. Now I could call this positional disaster, and it was positional disaster by black. Now, next game played by Karpov was very, very interesting. He played very positional game in the beginning, but got a chance for tactics out of position. Any positional, very positional and static position has tactical potentials, and that's why you have to keep your eyes open. Here is the example: c4, c5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castle, castle, d4, d5, cd, ed, and now d takes c, d4, this is all theory, knight a4, bishop f5, a3, a5. White has an extra pawn, but black has some space here, and also c5 pawn is weak. Bishop f4, knight e4, rook c1, rook e8, queen b3, rook a7, attacking b7 pawn, rook a7. Now, this position, it looks like white position where white has extra pawn, and it's not clear what black has for it. In reality, this position is nearly finished. This position is almost over. Knight g5 was played, and we see that in this position there is practically no defense for black. Now, after knight g5, bishop e4 was played. In this position, obviously knight e4 is not good because rook just goes to f to d1. So the move was played by black was bishop e4, and now after knight g5, this is all over. Knight g5, attacking bishop on e4 and attacking pawn on f7. Move is forced by black, bishop d5. Now white plays bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, attacking f4 bishop and attacking g5 knight. But now knight takes f7. It's no, you cannot say this is just out of the blue knight takes f7, because it's not. This is, white has very good grounds for this combination. Knight takes f7 because there is a pin, there is a possible attacking of knight, and you see how the rest of the pieces come into the game. King takes f7 and knight b6. Now d5 knight is attacked. There is only one way to defend, and this is the way with the king. And now white needs to open more files. They have to open E file and D file. Move is E4, threatening the knight, so black must take en passant, and now rook F to E1. Threatening rook takes E3. Knight D4, and rook takes E3, king F7, queen takes D5, queen takes D5, knight takes D5. Now white has two extra pawns. this is the result of the combination. It does not have to end with a mate, as we mentioned. And after knight e6, it's further simplifications by rook takes e6, king takes e6, knight c7 check. Black simply resigned because after king f7, it's not much fun to play endgame with 2 pawns down against one of the best endgames players alive. So, and black simply resigned in that game, in this position. A lot of times I realized talking to Anatoly Karpov that how important it is to have very simple approach to the game. And next example I want to show you is a good, very good illustration of it. So it shows it very well. So he talks to me, said his approach to the game is not complicated. He has very, very simple approach. And talking to him, you realize that you're talking to someone that uses only basics of chess, but he uses them so, his use of them is so precise and so deep that he has great results with it. Next game is amazing, amazing by simplicity and by preciseness of it. Okay, c4, knight f6, it was played against Danish Grandmaster Hansen. Knight f3, b6, g3, c5, bishop g2, bishop b7, castle, e6, knight c3, a6, b3, bishop e7, bishop, pawn d4, pawn takes, queen takes, d6, bishop a3, knight c6, queen f4, queen b8, rook fd1, attacking pawn on d5 and pawn d5. Now this is position that's been played several times. Bishop takes e7, and black simply played knight takes e7. Well, taking queen on f4 is not such a great idea because in the endgame, after pawn takes, knight takes e7 and knight e5, the pressure on the spin on b7 pawn gives white substantial advantage. So this is known position and known continuation, so we don't want to get into details of it. Bishop takes e7, knight takes e7. Now let's look this position. White has 0 threats. What do they have that black doesn't have? Very little. So white is a little better developed, but black is only one move away for completing development by castling, right? So what can white do? Karpov played knight e5. And here, black has to solve some problems. Well, they started with a castle, of course. Castling, and in this position, white played c takes d. And amazingly, black is in real bad shape. Knight e takes d5, knight takes d5, and bishop takes d5. Now point that knight takes d5 nearly loses for black. Again, very simple calculation. You don't give bishop on g2 for knight, and don't let black hold this diagonal unless there is a very good reason for it. And after knight d7, black is lost. Black is losing pawn, getting bad endgame with bad pawn structure and pawn down. Now after knight takes d7, there is a fork to queen and the rook, and on queen takes f4, pawn takes f4, and you see that rook hangs and pawn hangs on b6. So therefore, in this position, black must take on d5 with the bishop. Now white goes e4. Now this is also very concrete, very simple approach. e4, bishop b7, and now white's g2 bishop does not look too good. Bishop on b7 looks a little better than that. But the problem is that after rook a c1, white is totally mobilized. What did he do? What is a big strategy? What is so ingenious in what white did here? Nothing. What they did, they developed pieces, they put rooks on open file. That's something I learned when I was 7 years old, 6 years old. I knew that just the way Karpov knows now. That was what we have to do. And that's what probably any of you knows and learned just shortly after you learn how to move chess pieces. But now we have to look, we have to see that black is practically lost. There is no good way of concluding development. Black played rook d8, probably a bad mistake. Maybe rook c8 was better, but it's still not good. So rook d8, and here is very, very simple combination. Rook takes d8, queen takes d8, and very simple shot, knight takes f7. It's a shot for, that any beginner can see. King takes, if king takes, you simply go rook c7 check and take on b7. That's as simple as it can get. After knight takes f7, queen d4, and now how to precisely and accurately convert this position into a win. There are ways. Knight g5 is not that bad, but then black goes e5, and still big advantage for white, but bishop is kind of bad. The precise move is queen d6. Very simple move, also tactical, but it's very basics, very basic. Queen d6, if black takes, white takes back, attacks b7 bishop, and black is hopelessly lost. So black must go queen b2, and now white simply removes the rook. Now pawn on e6 is hanging, and if black takes the knight, then queen c7, check, queen takes bishop. It's all two-move combinations, and rook is hanging, and every pawn black owns is hanging almost. So black's move in this position is practically forced to avoid immediate disaster. They played rook e8, protecting e-pawn. Now queen c7, attacking bishop, protecting knight, and knight g5, threatening queen f7 check. And after h6, queen f7 check, king h8, and white made a killing move here. Very simple and extremely effective move. e5, black resigned immediately. That's very simple move, because now if black takes the knight, white takes the knight, threatening mate on g7, queen takes g7, threatening queen takes e8, and on rook g8 there is a queen h5 mate. And after e5, knight cannot move, rook hangs, and if queen takes e5, you see that knight f7, knight can go to where queen is, and it's going to be a fork. So queen takes Rook on e8 gives white an extra rook in the end game, which is winning in most of the cases. So knight f7, king g8, knight takes e5. Very simple game played against grandmaster of high caliber. Very simple game and very basic approach. Put rooks on open files, develop your pieces, and when there is a simple shot, don't miss it. Just be very consistent. Don't look for exceptions from the basic rules. Just follow them religiously, closely, and you will make great progress. It's not something that's gonna happen overnight, but look at more of those games and look at logical conclusion. Okay, let's look at the next game. Next game is very unique. It's very unique how the way Karpov won this game, very short game, and by very simple moves. I would have played that position differently and probably would have succeeded too, maybe not as quick as he did, but look at his approach to this. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, de, knight takes e4. And a lot of times when I talk to him and I spoke to him and I analyzed games with him, or we played together sometimes online and we tried together to come up with the best move, what amazed me is the childish and simple approach to the game. Very simple. He was telling me the things that I knew already when I was just upcoming chess player. But the preciseness of his thoughts, it was amazing. And that's why he got to where he got. Knight takes e4, knight f6, knight takes f6, pawn takes f6. That's one of the variations of French. Bishop e3, b6, bishop e2, trying to put bishop on f3. Bishop b7, bishop f3, queen c8, knight h3, knight d7, castles, c5, rook e1. Now, rook e1 is one move. Well, actually, it's a good move, of course. Queen c7, terrible move. White played bishop f4, and black was forced to go queen c8. Now, we're not here to criticize black's move and what was better for black. That's not our idea. What we want to do, we want to see how he took advantage of this position. In this position, after bishop queen c8, he played c3. That is the move that I would never make. That does not mean that c3 is the only correct move that that there is in this position. This is the move was chosen by Anatoly Karpov. But there are other moves that are equally, at least, as good. And if you use logical approach, you can definitely get to one of them. Let's look at them. The reason why white played c3, because on cd, he wants to retake with the pawn, holding the critical squares and also keeping the c file open. But let's look at other possibilities here in this position. One possible positionally good move is d5. I think it's very, very strong because I am attacking e6 pawn, and if you go e5, I will go bishop g4. Now, after going even c4, I have protected pass pawn, I have the diagonal weak light squares. My only problem is knight on h3, but I will relocate it. d5 is very good move. d5 is very good move after exchanging the bishops too. Bishop is on f4 after exchanging bishop. I think they're all good moves. When we say think and play like a grandmaster, we don't mean think and play like Grandmaster Karpov. No. That's my approach. I'm grandmaster. I'm not on the level of the Karpov. But I would play this. If you play like I do, you may do well too. Well, it depending who you are. Okay, now, so d5 is good, c3 is good. Now, let's go on with a few other moves. Queen e2 is good, or queen d2. Then bringing rook a to d1. They are all good moves. Move played by Karpov is good move, not the only move. So you can go different ways. So c3, bishop g7. He wants to castle. Black wants to castle king side. Now bishop d6. Of course, we have to interfere. We want, now in this position, I think, bishop d6 is the best move because you don't want your opponent to castle. The other reason why bishop d6 is very good move, it's multi-purpose move. First of all, it stops development, stops castling, and second, lets the knight go to f4 and into the game. And after bishop d6, black played c4. They want to stop opening the position. Knight f4. Now bishop f8. Bishop takes f8. King takes f8. I think still d5 is good move, but played by Karpov was bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, and queen h5. It's very exemplary to see how he places his pieces. Look at his queen on h5. Absolutely dominating in a best square on the board, probably. Rook on e1, best file. Knight on f4, best position in the center. And rooks coming to double. Black's days are numbered, that's for sure, here. After queen h5, rook d8, queen h6 check, king e7, queen g7. That's the final blow, threatening rook takes e6 check. Here is no defense. On king e8, rook is hanging on h8. So black played e5, d takes e, f takes e, and rook a to d1. This is the position that you can take picture of. Just look at white's pieces. If you took them off the board, those pieces, and I would tell you, try to put two rooks, queen, and knight on the best positions for white. I don't think you can find better position for rooks than E and D file. Knight on f4 is one of the best positions aiming for d5 square. And queen on g7, very close to black's king and also trying to assault. Now it's threatening. The threat now, after rook a to d1, the threat is rook takes e5 check. And after knight takes e5, queen takes e5, there is a mate next move. On king f8, rook takes d8 mate. So there is a threat of instant checkmate. And after rook a to d1, black played queen b8. And now knight d5 check, king e6. And here, well, there are a million ways to win here, f4 and so on, but simple way that Karpov chose is queen g4 check. He never goes for flashy continuations. It's the simplicity. f5, and he goes back queen to g7. Now threatening queen e7 mate, threatening knight f4 mate in one move, and there is no defense. Knight f4 is a checkmate, and queen e7 is checkmate. The king is ahead of all his army there, and it's about to get mated. Total disaster. Well done. Now, next game, I want to show you. It's Karpov's game also. Against, this is a little more complicated from positional standpoints, but easily understandable. He played against world's top woman player and one of the top players in the world among men too, against Judith Polgar. This is King's Indian defense. d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, c4. Bishop g7, g3, castle, bishop g2. This is the fianchetto variation of King's Indian. Castle, knight c6, knight c3, e5, d5, knight e7, e4. Very well known position. Knight d7, knight e1, f5. This is all theory. Knight d3, knight f6, and bishop to g5. F takes e, knight takes to e4, knight goes to f5. This part I'm going through quickly just to putting emphasis on the critical position. Knight f5, rook e1, h6, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6. And this is the type of position. You see black has pawns on dark squares, white has on white. So exchange of dark square bishops in those cases favors the person who has pawns on the same of the bishop color. So if black has pawns on dark squares, it's good for them to exchange dark square bishops. So Karpov plays bishop d2, king h7, bishop to c3, bishop d7, and there starts queen side play by white. c5, b6. Now that's a bad move. That's a bad move because it allows white to play c6, bishop c8. Now the reason, what makes it bad, that after bishop on c8, pawn on c6, all of a sudden is a very strong move. Well, actually black played bishop e8. It's a very strong pawn, and we see later in the game. f4. Now pawn on c6 takes some squares away from black's position, and now white opens the position. f4, pawn takes f4, knight takes f4, and bishop f7. e6 is the target square. Bishop f7, queen to d3. Black has very difficult position. Bishop takes c3. White wants to maintain queen on this diagonal with the black's king, and pawn takes c3. Now we have terrible bishop for black on f7, very weak square on e6, very well placed knight on f4, and open e-file. I think black's position is strategically lost here. Polgar played here queen g5. h4 played by white. Extremely strong move. Queen has to go back to f6. There is no other move. Queen takes g3 will lead to immediate disaster, because after exchanging queens, you see the power of c6 pawn. After rook e7, there is nothing left to play for, because there are two deadly threats. Knight e6, attacking rook, and rook has to, if rook moves, then you lose the bishop, and also rook takes c7, after which c6 pawn will be totally murderous pawn. So taking on g3 is impossible. So she played queen f6, the only move that they can play. Now knight e6. Attacking f8 rook and c7 pawn. Bishop takes, rook takes. Now white is ready to play bishop e4, rook e1, and after queen g7, h5. There is no simple combination, just every move continuous pressure and very well aimed. h5, knight e7, rook a to e1. You see, white wants to take on g6, and they want to drive the knight away first. Now after rook a1, black simply resign, because on rook f7, white can go queen e4, and there is no defense. You see, everything falls. After queen f7, there is no way of protecting knight. If knight moves, pawn takes pawn. Since on rook e8, pawn takes pawn, there is no way to retake this pawn. What if knight takes, rook hangs, and black just loses most of his pieces. And in this position, there is no defense, and after rook e1, black simply resign. Now, how can player of Paul Gard's caliber lose in 20-some moves, in 22 moves, on 25 moves like this, no matter against who? Because that was very well planned. c6 pawn took a lot of squares and open position in the center and get targets easily. Every move that was played by white was very well aimed and was extremely simple. That's what we like. That's the easiest, the best way to play chess, to play simple chess, especially on the level until you get grandmasters. Once you get on very high level, you will learn more and more other subtleties of the chess. Then you don't need to watch any or buy any instructional videos and DVDs. So another game I want to show you. This is a very famous game played between Anatoly Karpov and Vlastimil Hort. At that time, one of the top GMs on the planet. And this is Caro-Kann defense, d4, d5, knight d2, de, knight takes c4, knight d7, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes, knight e5, bishop f5, c3, e6. Now, e6, it's not the best move in this position. It's considered knight d7 is one of the possibilities. Well, after e6, what happened here? g4, black got quickly in trouble. g4, bishop g6, h4. I remember shortly after that they played another game. It was very sharp game they played with this opening. We don't want to get into details because bishop e4 was played and black sacrificed piece, and it was messy game and also one won by Karpov. But this was more like positional game. h4, h5, g5, knight d5, knight takes g6, and f takes g. Now, let's talk about this position. Black has totally broken pawn structure. Weak pawn on g6, which was targeted immediately by queen c2 and king f7, and rook h3. Here Karpov wants to play rook f3, and then it's going to be if rook f3 white plays and king moves, queen takes g6, white would win. But there is an f5 square, very good outpost for black knight. And it looks like black is okay. On bishop c4, black played knight f5. You cannot drive this knight away, and it looks like it's okay for black. They're going to go bishop d6, rook e8, and they're going to develop rest of their pieces. However, that's not so. After rook f3, the idea is rook takes f5 to sacrifice exchange. Now, let's go with the queen d7. That's what happened in the game. And that's the approach to the simple approach to the chess game. You sacrifice what you sacrifice here is practically material 1 pawn's worth. You sacrifice the rook for bishop and the pawn. It's not much of a sacrifice. It's like you sacrifice the pawn. But look at black's position. King on e7, blocking his bishop. And now after white simply played queen e4, let's assess this position. Black has terrible weakness on e4. And white has 2 powerful bishops. And after they castle, big space advantage and very dangerous threat against the king. And meanwhile, black has tremendous difficulties finishing development. After queen e4, what happened here after queen e4, black played rook e8, bishop f4, king d8. Now black wants to develop the bishop finally and maybe breathe freely after that. However, queen e5 prevents this possibility. Now after queen e5, bishop d6 is not possible. So white stops their castling for one move. Queen e5, rook g8. Now white castles. You see, black is totally paralyzed. There is no piece that can move. G6, rook e1. Continuous simple pressure, attacking pawn. There was not one complicated move that was made. The principal decision was made that was maybe a little complicated, but I don't think so. The principal decision was to sacrifice small material for big positional advantages. And that's what happened. Small sacrifice of small material, it's sacrificing rook for bishop and a pawn. And now black is totally paralyzed. Rook e1, bishop g7, queen b8 check, king e7, and rook takes e6, and black simply resigned. Well, what can happen here? If queen takes, then queen c7 check, and on queen d7, bishop d6 is a checkmate. It's the very, very unusual checkmate, but the whole play for white was very normal, very precise, very simple. Not a single tactical shot, if you don't consider rook takes e6 a tactical shot. Not a single tactical shot, but very high level of preciseness and very consistent play. So this is the simplicity of Karpov's approach, and that's the way he thinks in chess. Karpov does not have the deepest idea. He has some very deep ideas, but all those deep ideas, they are very simple. And that's what makes them, idea is so simple. He eliminates all kinds of complications in assessing positions. Every thought he has is down to earth and very concrete and extremely logical. Okay, now let's look at one of the game that I played. It's a memorable game for me. Game played against another American grandmaster, Lev Albert. Alekhine defense, favorite opening of my opponent. e5, knight d5, d4, d6, knight f3, g6, bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b3, and here after bishop g7, knight g5. Now this is all opening theory. e6, queen f3, castles, and queen h3. Now this at that time, this was very well known in theory, but queen h3, they didn't really play this move much in the games. h6, knight e4, and d5. Now after knight c5, you see the h pawn is hanging. Black simply played king h7, knight d2, knight b6 to d7, knight takes d7, bishop takes d7. Now let's talk about this position. In this position, as in most of the position with closed center, d4, e5 versus e6, d5, d4, e5 versus e6, d5, if black has dark light square bishop, it's not a good piece. White castle here, c5, c3, c takes d, c takes d. And the problem here for black that white has a threat of knight f3 and possibly bishop g5 and organizing very strong attack on the king side with the help of bishop on c2. So in this position, black is preparing for knight f3 and possible knight g5 check or bishop g5 by playing rook h8. And after knight f3, they went king g8. Now black is totally safe on king side, at least for now. But notice that they made a half a castling. So they put the king on g8, but rook on h8 is not really a good piece here. So I played bishop d2, preparing for bishop to b4. Now that's a good diagonal for a bishop. Bishop f8, stopping it, rook f2 e1, and after knight c6, queen to g4. Now, trying to improve the queen's position. What's white's plan here? White's plan to eventually to put rook on c-file and start h4, h5 and create weaknesses little by little. You cannot quickly assault black's king's position. You have to slowly build up the pressure on king's side. Rook c8, rook a to c1, just improving piece's position. Knight e7, rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and rook c1. Queen to d8. Now white has little advantage on queen side and little advantage on king side, on queen and king side, on both sides. Now bishop b4. And you see, as we mentioned before, exchanging of dark square bishop favors white, because black is going to have bad bishop on d7. Knight f5, bishop takes f8, and king takes f8. Queen f4, king g7, h4. Now, there is a threat. White has very strong threat. You see, this is planned. g4 is a threat. For instance, if it's white's move, white can go g4, and if knight takes h4, queen f6 check wins a piece. You see, it's easy to see. Queen takes f6, pawn takes f6 with a check, followed by knight takes knight. So black's move, next move, is practically forced. Is to go h5 to stop g4 move. But by playing h5, they make even more weaknesses, or more dark square weaknesses on the king side. After h5, bishop c2. Here, in order to avoid total positional disaster, which will be bishop takes f5, followed by knight g5, this is positionally hopeless thing, because white can win on king side, on queen side, the dominating knight, and all holes on dark squares. Black is practically forced to play in this position knight h6. But then bishop d3, so we transferred bishop on a better diagonal. which is d3, b1, h7, and also preventing black bishop from going to b5. Now black played rook f8. They don't really have constructive plan. Knight g5, and now a5. There is no particular meaning to this move, but there are no good moves anyway. So after a5, queen f6, check. Well, obviously, taking on f6 is very bad, since pawn takes, and now you cannot play king takes f6 because of knight h7 check, fork. And if king goes back to g8, white can simply play maybe rook c7. That's a total disaster. And after bishop c6, probably bishop takes g7, winning the game. Pawn takes g7, rook g7 check, rook h7 check, as well as many other ways probably we have as well. Okay, in this position, black played, after queen f6 check, black played king g8. But then queen takes queen, rook takes queen, rook c7, very simple, very logical continuation. Bishop c6, and now looks like black is barely holding position together. They need a whole big piece like a knight to protect f7 square. Black's rook has zero flexibility. Now all white needs to do to go somehow b4 and b5. If white can go b4 and b5, then black bishop has to move and black falls apart. But you have to prepare to go b4. You don't go a3 because after a4, it's very difficult to make progress. So the plan is b3, followed by a3, and followed by b4. And there is nothing black can do against it. After b3, rook d7. Of course, we don't exchange very active rook for very passive rook. Check, king g7, and now a3. Knight goes to f5. Bishop goes to a5. ef. And now, finally, we got the best piece on the board is knight on g5 versus worst piece, which is bishop on c3. Now, all we have to do, white's plan, is to go e6 somehow and bring the king. Here is the plan what white wants to do. King h2, king g3, king f4, e6, let him take, and then king e5. This is very easily doable because black is totally paralyzed. Totally paralyzed. They cannot make a single move that can make any sense in this position. So black played a4. So now normal reaction would have been d4 here, but as I said, the plan is a plan, but concrete approach, I would have played b4 unless I see that I can win something big. And b takes a is one of those moves that speeds up the process. Now, after bishop takes a4, there is a killer move, e6. I don't want normally to exchange those pawns, but this is concrete case. Rook is hanging, and pawn takes pawn is threatening. F takes e is forced. Knight takes e6. King f6, and knight c5. You see the fork on a rook and the bishop. Black played rook e7. They lost a piece, knight on a4, rook e4, g3, rook takes d4, knight c5, rook d2, king g2. Black could have resigned here, but they made a few more moves. Rook a2, a4, king e5, knight d3, king d4, knight f4, rook takes a4, rook b4, rook b8, and on rook b4, knight takes g6. And game continued like a couple of more moves. Knight f4, d4, rook check, and black resigned here. They are just pieced down. This pawn is stopped already, and after rook c5, we can clean up every pawn on f5 and h5. So this was, actually this was very well planned game. It was very, very simple. It was as simple as can be played by any player who learned and followed accurately the basic principles they know. So this was played game by me, and I was Grandmaster then on a very good level, very good standing. And anyone who is like B player, even A player, I don't see there any problems them making any move that I made. They may not make all of them, but not every move was very precise and like forceful from white standpoint. So let's look now. One game of Karpov I want to specially show you. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, bishop b4, and bishop g5. h6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, e3, castle, bishop e2, d takes c. White simply castled because this pawn on c4 is not really going anywhere. Rook c1, b6 actually black went, rook c1, bishop b7, knight b5, attacking c7 pawn, a6, and now, of course, taking this pawn on c7 is very dangerous because of rook a7, and knight may never come back home. So rook takes c4, attacking the bishop on b4, pawn takes knight, rook takes pawn, rook takes a2, rook takes b5, and on bishop c6, rook b4. This is the simple position, very simple. White has an advantage here because of the pawn structure. You see, white has more centralized position of their pawns. They can go queen c2 and put a lot of pressure on black's c7 pawn. So white has clear advantage here. Knight d7, rook c4, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3. Now, if rook takes b2 in this position, I think after rook takes c7 and followed by queen a4, black is in a lot of trouble. What happened in the game is black played c5, and after queen b3 attacking rook, rook a5. Now, the way Karpov thinks about this position, the way he approaches those positions, I haven't spoken to him about this particular game, but I know I can almost quote him what he would say. Rook d1, it's very difficult. He said, my opponent has zero future in this position, and it is so. Now, if white takes, the coordination of white's pieces is a lot stronger, a lot better than black's pieces. You will see the rooks doubled on d-file. Bishop is a better piece than a knight. If knight goes anywhere, like e5, After bishop e2, this knight is not stable, will be kicked out, b6 pawn is weak, d-file. All together, all this together gives black problems. And once you play, remember, it's not how much you're threatening but in this position, but when someone who has this position with black is very, very uncomfortable, and especially if it's not the highest level, when chess player feels uncomfortable, he is on the verge of making some critical mistakes. Here, black did not make critical mistakes. Probably they made few inaccurate moves, which was more than enough. Black cannot stand the pressure. White may want to take here, or this unclear position in its center, so black played e5. D takes c, knight takes c5, and queen c2. Now it's threatening b4. White has, there are two important files in this position, d file and c file. White has them both. They have d file, and they're threatening to play b4, chase the knight away, and get the c file. Knight e6, b4, rook a7, and rook c6. Now they're pinning the knight. You see the clear target on b6. The position is already lost for black. Very simple. You see there was no big battle over something. There was no big confrontation of pieces. White's pieces just went to right squares at the right times in very simple approach. h3, actually was rook d8 was played. Now h3, rook takes d1, queen takes d1, b5. Now, let's talk about this position again. Why in this position, when black played rook d8, white did not take the pawn on b6? That's a very legitimate question. Why can't black just win a pawn? What happens here is that there is a possible combination on black side. So when I say you have to see tactics, you have to see tactics that you can perform, and you must also see tactics that your opponent may find. For example, one of the possibilities is rook takes d1, queen takes d1, followed by e4. Now, this may be a little dangerous for white, because on bishop takes e4, rook a1, you see the queen is hanging, and on bishop b1, queen b2, but here white is mating black. This is interesting. Rook b8 check, knight f8, only move. Rook takes f8 check, king takes f8, and queen d8 may checkmate. Oh, is that mean white was winning there? No, it's not. That means that black played badly. So the e4 is still possible, but it's complications. e4 is possible. So now if black takes on d1, queen takes on d1, and now black plays e4. Now bishop takes e4, rook a1. Suppose the check was done now, knight f8, and bishop b1. Now the idea of being pinned on b1, it's not such a great idea for white. Maybe black can go g6 and threatening queen b2. I think white is in trouble. It's a big problem. So what happened here that Karpov simply didn't go for it. So he avoided complications. So what he did, he simply played, defended the back rank by playing h6. By playing h3, he has very good sense of danger, and when he played h3, he simply avoided that combination. And black played rook takes d1, queen takes d1, and b5. Now white went queen d5. After queen d5, you see the b5 pawn still hangs. King has a square on h2. Black's pieces are pinned, and white is totally dominating central position. The game practically over. Queen h4, rook check, king h7. Now queen takes e5. Now white doesn't want anymore the b5 pawn. What they want to take on e5 and simply checkmate black's king. Knight g5. So now white holds the a1 square, so black can never play queen a1 check because rook a1 check because queen is going to take on a1. On the other hand, threatens bishop e4 with an instant mate, because after g6, queen h8 mate. So black's answer is practically forced, knight g5. Now white goes bishop g4, threatening bishop f5 mate. And there is no defense now. Bishop f5 is coming next. Black still played rook e7. Now that white cannot take the queen because black knight gives some check on f3 or h3 and picks up white's queen. But as we mentioned, the main threat is bishop f5 check. And after bishop f5 check, there is a mate, very next move. After g6, queen h8 mate or rook h8 mate, and game is over. Now this was very well planned and very simply played game. Now what I want to summarize, the things we learned. The things we learned here are those: that it's not what is the best move to make. You don't have to make the absolute best move. What you have to do, you have to build the plan and consistently and be very consistent with it. So stick with the plan and calculate. Be very careful watching for looking at the small tactical shots. When you have them, execute them, and if your opponent has them, try to keep track of them and try to avoid them and calculate more. Now, this is easy to say, it's a lot more difficult to do, but that's the easiest way to improve in chess, and that's the only correct way to improve in chess. Not by playing millions of games. You play less games, but every game that you play, try to get something out of it. Try to build plan, stick with it, be consistent. You do some mistakes, you analyze, find them, try to avoid them next time. And that's how you're going to improve. So, of course, it has to be backed up with certain knowledge of tactics, strategy, positional ideas, and most importantly, good, solid opening repertoire. If you don't have repertoire, you will not be getting positions with clearly outlined plans. So those are the necessary ingredients for becoming a good chess player, improved chess player. For any level, if you are 1300 player, that goes for anybody. You can think like a grandmaster. Well, I just explained you how some of the top players that I worked with, how they think about certain positions. Try to think the same way. Use the same logic. That's how you're going to improve. Back it up with the tactical and positional skills and the opening repertoire. I guarantee you will improve. That's the only and correct way to improve in the game of chess. Good luck to you and see you soon.